Your Grace,
said Reynard, saluting and clicking his heels.
Peasants from the Scala region have arrived at camp. Supplicants, wishing to deliver a plea to your person.
Meve sighed. Supplicants, trials, audiences. All aspects of queendom she did not miss.
Very well. Bring them here.
She replied.
And instruct them to be brief, with no digressions.
The band of commoners was led by a sturdily built beekeeper dubbed Ethelred, son of Theobald. Finding himself in the Queen's presence, he fell to his knees and waved his arms in his best impression of proper etiquette.
Oh, my lady the Queen, your gracious mightiness, take pity on us tillers and toilers. Wars all around, leaving us but scraps to live off, and barely that, to be honest. So we beg you, don't do it. Don't raise the levies. We can't pay more than...
What?
Meve interrupted.
What the devils are you talking about?
What? Your decree? One they nailed to our notice board.
The peasant said, sheepishly pulling out a parchment and pointing to the relevant paragraph with his rough finger.
We, Queen Meve, do hereby proclaim that if our throne we shall recover, the tallage, murage, and pavage we shall raise threefold. The expenses of this war for to compensate at the cost of the common folk.
Meve and Reynard exchanged astonished glances. They had issued no such decree. Yet the document bore her signature and seal.
Willem, did you have a hand in this?
No, Mother.
The prince said, shaking his head.
We were at odds, true, but never would have forged your name.
Then who fabricated this decree?
The Nilfgaardians.
The Queen replied without hesitation.
They have access to my seal, to my scribes. They wish to spread fear, uncertainty, and doubt, turn my folk against me. And they are liars without any honor.
The Queen tore the falsified document to shreds. Knowing this would solve nothing, she had to find the printers churning out these fakeries and end their run.
Oi, Mevey!
Cried Gascon, as usual paying no heed to courtly etiquette.
Come here a minute.
Would it hurt so terribly to occasionally address me by Your Grace or Your Majesty?
I didn't want to be petty, but since you bring it up, you've never once addressed me as the Duke of Dogs.
Meve sighed, rolling her eyes.
Get on with it.
My lads jumped one of the Blackclads' transports. Guess what they were hauling?
Gascon handed Meve a pot filled to the brim with a thick, dark fluid.
Paint?
Close. Printer's ink. Same tone used in those phony decrees.
Meve spun on her heel, put a hand to her mouth, and yelled,
Reynard! Send scouts to comb the area!
Her soldiers returned a few hours later with good news. They were able to find a Nilfgaardian printer's workshop hidden in an abandoned barn. It was guarded by a division of elite infantry.
Right, so?
Gascon thumbed the edge of his blade.
Shall we stop the presses?
Time for the Nilfgaardians to publish a retraction.
Spoke the Queen as she drew her sword.
Signed with their own blood. Follow me!
The Lyrians did not need to be told twice. Their Queen's honor, her good name, that was a cause well worth fighting for.
It's her! Yes, you fool her! Sound the alarm! Larum!
They weren't expecting us. Seems they believed their own blarney.
The Nilfgaardians fought fiercely, led by a seasoned covert agent. Seeing he would soon fall into enemy hands, he put a knife to his throat and, in a quick slash, sent blood pouring over paper and still wet ink. Reynard leapt towards him, trying to stanch the red tide. But it was too late, and the spy's secrets perished with his last gargled breath. Meve picked up a freshly printed pamphlet. The document listed her many crimes and misdeeds, the true and the manufactured alike. Above the main body of the text, an etching depicted her, well, in a very unflattering manner.
How about a taste of their own medicine?
Asked Gascon, piecing blocks of type into a scathingly foul phrase.
Me and the lads will scratch out a couplet about Epdahi, Spread it around the countryside, give the folk a hearty laugh at those tossers' expense.
Yes, these presses should be put to good use.
the Queen said.
But printing lewd jests is not it. We must spread facts. Tell what the Nilfgaardians did in Aldersburg, how they tried to murder me in Mahakam and Angren. What fate lies in store for those they conquer.
Gascon grew serious and set the ink-stained type back down.
Get to work. Before the sun sets, I wish to hold the first document in my hands.
Soon, in every town, village and tavern, there hung a notice detailing Nilfgaard's crimes. The outraged Rivians did what they could to strengthen the Queen's army. Some by offering coin, others by joining her ranks.
Nilfgaard left none alive in Rosberg, not even one woman, and no child was spared! Peasants from Edern have been captured and put to work by force. Nilfgaard now prepares the same fate for Rivia and all Rivians. Emperor Emir var Emrys is a Fran imposter, a Fran Doppler!
These lands, they look familiar to you?
Naturally, Your Grace. They're the venerable Count Caldwell's.
War, death, chaos. Everywhere but here. This land's positively pastoral.
The traitorous Caldwell family's residence loomed into view. Against the horizon, it looked suitably sinister. Yet the manor had changed since Meve last saw it. 2 new wings, ornate towers, a grand colonnade. And the windows now glistened with stained glass, the gilded hue of imperial suns.
We must pay them a visit.
Seethed the Queen. The great double doors opened with an echoing thud. Just inside them stood the heir to the estate, Dragomir, his wife and 3 children by his side, and Helena, the treacherous Count's widow. Sliding the cap from his head, thus giving proof of the family's hereditary baldness, Dragomir knelt down upon one knee.
Your Grace, my father's betrayal stands beyond doubt and exoneration.
The young Caldwell said flawlessly and in a single breath, as if he'd practiced a dozen times.
And his death at your hands was most well deserved. I beseech you to lay your trust in Prince Willem. He'll confirm I knew naught of my father's plans. I humbly ask that you not punish me for his sins. Allow me to stay on my ancestral lands, to serve faithfully as your loyal subject.
I believe not a word slithering out of his mouth,
Whispered Reynard.
The first chance he gets to stab you in the back, he will take.
Meve narrowed her eyes and gazed at Dragomir. Large drops of sweat dripped from his brow.
You may stay,
Said the Queen, finally breaking the silence.
on 2 conditions. Firstly, you will make a considerable donation toward the war effort. Then field an infantry regiment, fully outfitted, under my command.
Naturally, Your Grace. And the other?
In one swift motion, Meve snatched a crossbow from a soldier, put it to her cheek, and loosed. Caldwell the Younger screamed bloody murder as he threw up his arms to shield his face. The bolt hissed by and struck the center of a golden sun, shattering one of the stained glass windows.
Redecorate.
Said the Queen flatly. She then mounted up and sped off, earnestly hoping she'd not come to regret her generosity.
I shall replace the glazing in the windows to bear Rivian diamonds. A glazier I've already sent for.
Let me tell you of Ravencloft, a quarry Meve passed by. A quarry with a dark history. For years earlier, its wall had collapsed, burying dozens alive. Scholars summoned from Oxenfurt were unanimous in their findings. The rock was fragile, further digging would likely cause slides. Meve had heeded the scholars' advice and closed the quarry by royal decree. Yet now, as she neared it, Meve could hear the even tap of pickaxes. She dispatched scouts to investigate. They returned promptly, their faces sullen, their cloaks blanched with a fine limestone dust.
Quarry's open anew, Your Grace. Nilfgaardians. They've got folk in the pit working it. Appear to be from the surrounding villages.
Interesting. Their engineers have found a way to render it safe, secure the walls.
I'd say that's right unlikely, Majesty. Judging by the fresh graves we saw.
My son. I trust now you see the superior culture Nilfgaard has brought.
Said Meve, turning towards Willem. In answer, the prince merely dropped his head. The queen then turned to Reynard, as ever at her side.
Reynard, what do you advise?
As a soldier, my queen, I'd advise against any kind of assault. The terrain's hard, unsuitable for a fight, and we've little to gain from a victory. As a man, however,
Yes?
to leave our folk in chains, in that death trap, 'twouldn't be right.
If I were to calculate in heart and mind, keep note of gains and losses,
Began Meve.
I'd bend the knee to the Imperials, just as Willem did. But bloody arithmetic won't dictate my course, for I do what's just. I do what's right. Follow me!
Her troops followed without hesitation, swords in hand, their hearts afire.
Those whoresons, forcing my own subjects to fight us.
Your Grace, if we begin killing the overseers, the labourers will turn against them. The overseers are dead, Your Grace.
The Lyrians handily dispatched the Nilfgaardian overseers, more trained in the ways of the whip than the sword. Those who survived now found themselves shackled in the very chains they'd forced the peasants to wear. Peasants. Oh, unfortunate souls. The cruel labor in the quarry had taken its toll. They stood before the queen, shrunken to skin and bone, clothed in tattered rags, their eyes reddened by dust. But in those eyes burned a brilliant fire.
Your Grace, them black-clads treated us like dogs, stripped us of dignity. So we beg you, give us arms. Let us march neath your banner. 'Tis a chance at revenge we seek, we want.
Reynard leaned towards Meve and spoke in a scarcely audible whisper.
Majesty, they've nowt. Not boots, not even foot wraps. To equip the lot, train them, would cost a small fortune.
'Tis true, they've nowt to their names.
Said the queen.
Have few skills to offer and little strength. But to look in their eyes is to know they'll never flee, never throw down their arms. Such recruits are worth coin in any amount.
Emaciated, downtrodden, the peasants met the queen's offer with gratitude. They relished the thought of facing their tormentors in a fight. Meve now reached Willowhain, a settlement she knew well, for it lay near Waldenrad, where in peacetime she would go to escape her queenly duties and enjoy the thrill of a hunt.
Pheasant, grouse, and partridge in abundance. You will see,
said Meve in muted excitement, pivoting in her saddle to face Gascon. Alas, it appeared the war had ravaged even these woods. Where life had stirred and grown tall before, only resinous trunks remained. And the village itself had lost its quaint allure, surrounded now by a double stockade, a golden sun fluttering above it.
Bastards couldn't even let the damn trees be.
Gascon seethed. A dismal scene. Her once cherished wood, and it weighed heavily on the queen's spirits. Waldenrad had been a place removed, where she could rest and forget the weight of her crown. Reynard's voice roused Meve from her sad reverie.
A Nilfgaardian garrison holds the village,
He said.
We ought to drive them out, avoid any surprise later from the rear.
give the order to attack, but none is to play the hero. We shall breach or topple the stockade together. Senseless to perish so close to home.
Reynard nodded. Moments later, the Lyrians rushed forth and attacked.
The time has come to purge these devils from our homes! Follow me! Rivia is ours! Ours!
When the battle dust had settled, Meve instructed her soldiers to gather Willowhain's inhabitants. Upon spotting their armed liberators, the common folk cowered in terror.
No longer need you fear.
The Queen shouted.
No longer must you worry about homes and loved ones. The war's nearly done.
Of a sudden, a villager dropped to his knees and raised his hands to the heavens in supplication.
Trache! Guide my queen!
Meve broke off oddly, baffled by the man's outburst. And then it dawned on her. The Rivians of Willowhain had been driven away. Taking their place, Nilfgaardian settlers brought in to transform the near-subsistence plots of local peasants into great estates producing for the Empire.
Reynard managed to grasp the essence of the Nilfgaardian peasants' frantic pleas.
They wish to stay. They've come to love the land. They pledged to renounce their emperor, swear allegiance to you as their rightful ruler.
Meve had stopped listening. She turned to survey the hamlet. The walls of the huts freshly whitewashed, tools neatly arranged, flower beds well tended. A young girl of 6 or 7 summers peered out from her hiding place in a sunflower patch.
Your Majesty?
Asked Reynard, having noted that Meve's mind had wandered.
What are your orders? What shall we do?
They can stay on 2 conditions. Tell them. For 15 years, they'll pay double the tax. And if any of the previous inhabitants return, they're to be given their huts, lands, and any crops produced in their absence without delay.
The Nilfgaardian settlers accepted the terms with relief. Meve soldiers with markedly less enthusiasm. As the force left Willowhain, the troops made a show of knocking aside any food or drink the peasants offered.
Hail Reina Maeve! Here Eagle!
Meve spied the outline of Malabon Castle on the horizon and turned dour. True, no golden suns waved atop its towers, yet that did not mean those within supported her. Malabon belonged to House Obert, long in conflict with Meve's own, and with Meve herself.
Behind their ramparts. Do you see them, Reynard?
Asked Meve, shaking her head.
Countless ballistae, collecting dust, while war rages all around.
Perhaps the Oberts will lend us aid,
Reynard replied.
True, you've been at odds with them in the past, but perhaps now, faced with a common foe.
A common foe?
Snorted the Queen.
You mean Nilfgaard, to whom they opened their gates? Caldwell, whom they supported?
They supported me, Mother.
Willem said.
And I know they share my disappointment with General Epdai's actions. When they see I now stand by your side, they might forget old wrongs.
The things I do for the good of my realm.
Meve sighed.
So be it. Reynard, send a runner to the castle. Tell the Oberts their queen seeks a word.
Moments later, the castle's heavy iron gate creaked open. Meve rode into the cobblestone courtyard, where Margravine Greta, head of the house, greeted her. Although, greeted is perhaps not the right word, for Lady Greta granted her only a barely perceptible nod.
What can I help you with, Meve?
The war, my dear. The one being fought outside the walls of your castle.
Greta smiled to herself, then intertwined her brittle, ring-covered fingers.
I'm afraid that's impossible.
It is a vassal's sacred duty to serve her liege, and
my liege is King Willem.
Greta calmly retorted. Hearing his name, Willem stepped forward.
I wish to add my name to my mother's entreaty,
said the prince.
We tried to pact with the Empire. We trusted General Epdai's promises, and he broke them, one after the other.
Margravine Greta dropped her gaze. The Oberts had lost lands, their serfs had been deported. Under Nilfgaard's rule, they had lost no less than the other great families.
We can brook no further delay. We must strike, united with all our might. Only thus can we retain hope for a victory.
Mine is long lost,
the noblewoman replied in a whisper.
I watched from my tower as their troops marched past. An endless sea of black plate. But you are right, Your Majesty. At some point, one must say enough. Even if that is one's last word.
Willem grasped the Margravine's brittle hand and bowed.
Thank you. On behalf of myself, my mother, and all our land.
Meve left Malabon Castle reinforced by the Oberts and reassured by Willem's actions. If earlier she had harbored doubts about forgiving her son his betrayal, now she was convinced she had done the right thing.
We march with you. Lyrian beside Rivian, together at the Blackclads.
Meave's force reached Cavaldon, a small, run-down town.
The Blackclads, they've a strong garrison in place.
Proclaimed her scouts upon returning from a foray.
And they stand prepared for a siege. Their stores overflow, and we've seen ballistas, scorpions.
Cavaldon can be taken,
began Reynard hesitantly.
but not without losses. Considerable losses.
A retreat? Is that what you advise?
I fear the soldiers wouldn't take to such a course. They're eager, Your Grace. They've a fire in them. Order a retreat and you could devastate morale.
Our losses may be heavy,
said Meave, drawing her sword.
but I'll make certain the vile invader suffers even more. Order the troops to prepare. We will attack.
Soon after, the Lyrians moved on Cavaldon, war drums rumbling in step to their march. Upon the walls, the Nilfgaardians stood poised to defend.
I won't leave a single city to these invader scum! For Lyria! For Rivia!
My, now that is some fancy weaponry. But it's still got that new war machine smell.
We must bring down their walls! Crush them! We did it, Your Grace. The city is ours.
The Nilfgaardians had indeed prepared well, with grapples to repel hook ladders from the walls and long spears to rain down upon attackers far below. Meave managed on the fourth attempt to breach the defences, but did so scrambling over the corpses of her own men. The Queen was in the field tent when Reynard arrived with surprising news. To be heard over the groans of the wounded, he had to raise his voice.
Your Grace, a delegation of townsfolk. They seek an audience urgently.
Dozens of burghers stood before the tent. Between them and the Queen, a man knelt in shackles. His face was blooded as if he'd endured a vicious beating just moments before.
Who's this?
Our blacksmith, Todo.
Snarled a priestess in a frayed robe.
He betrayed you, Your Grace. Soon after the Nilfgaardians arrived, within hours in truth, he offered his labour and strength. They didn't even need to ask. Forged arms and armour for them, all for imperial gold.
Meave gripped the beaten man's beard, tugged upwards, and looked him in the eyes.
Did you forge the hooks and the tips for those spears?
I did, Your Grace.
It was fine work.
Growled the Queen.
Damned fine.
Show him mercy, milady!
Cried a withered old man in a flour-spattered apron.
When the black-clad bastards captured my son, they were eager to hang him. Todo spoke for him, saved his life.
He helped me too!
Hollered a woman in the crowd.
I were hungry. He shared what little he had.
The townsfolk began shouting over one another. Some told of the blacksmith's noble deeds. Others labelled him a traitor deserving of a cruel and violent end. Meave turned back towards the field hospital, pondering the case, then spotted her soldiers' corpses laid out in rows. Had it not been for Todor, there might not have been so many.
Mother!
Willem's voice pierced the air, replete with tension.
My offences were far graver, yet you showed me compassion.
This man forged arms for the Nilfgaardians. 'Tis true.
Said Meave to the crowd.
Yet you, Baker, baked the bread they ate. And you, Potter, stained the cups from which they drank. Willingly or not, each of you aided the invader. Where does pursuing one's craft end and treason begin? I've no answer to that. So I shan't punish any for doing merely what's theirs to do.
Upon hearing the verdict, the Queen's troops stared in disbelief, then began to boil. As she walked back calmly to the tent, they jeered and hissed. At the last, it took Reynard to calm them down. Meave had saved Todor, but she was convinced she'd not see the blacksmith again. Come evening, he returned to the camp, with a wagon full of arms so new they shone.
If it weren't for you, Your Grace, they'd have torn me to bits with their bare hands,
he said, kneeling before her.
I thank ye for speaking up for me. For my innocence, that is. I've a gift for you. A gift I knows you'll put to proper use.
Meave took a spear in hand, put it to her shoulder, and gazed down the shaft. The tip glowed red in the light of the setting sun.
Of that, my friend, you can be sure.